It's a great honor to introduce Professor Ilan Pappé to today's panel. Ilan is an Israeli historian. He's currently a professor at the University of Exeter, and he also directs the European Center for Palestinian Studies there. And he became prominent all over the world because he used the privilege of Israeli citizenship, the position at the university, and the access to the archives to research about the history of Israeli apartheid, about the oppression of the Palestinian people, and especially about the ethnic cleansing during the Nakba in 1948. Therefore, you wrote many books, but one of the most important and most known ones is called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. Please, everybody, join me to welcome Ilan Pappé.
Thank you. It's great to see so many people here today. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me. Thank you for Haymarket, the publishers, for publishing the book. And I hope we will have a fruitful and constructive discussion, an open and a safe one within the boundaries of bureaucratic repression. Okay, yeah.
And Ilan, let me say 2 sentences about today's topic.
Oh, sorry.
Because I only said one of your books, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, but now today we are talking about your newest books, which is that one, Palestine in a World on Fire, in which you collected interviews with very important leftist writers, politicians, and activists about how the struggle for the liberation of Palestine is connected to struggles for solidarity against oppression and against capitalism all over the world. And you talked with Angela Davis, Noam Chomsky, Elias Khoury, Judith Butler, Nadine El-Enani, Yanis Varoufakis, and many other people. And we are super interested in hearing which lessons you drew out of these interviews and also what you have to say on solidarity with Palestine here in Germany, where we have a specific situation.
Right, thank you. Can you hear me now? Yeah, that's better. Yes, that's what I will do this afternoon. I will first talk about the book, what I think is important about it, and then I will try to contextualize it, to connect it to the situation that you are facing in Germany, because I think many of you are very active in the solidarity movement with the Palestinians in this country and face very exceptional and particular, I think, hardship that maybe some of them are shared by others in the continent, but definitely there is a particularly challenging kind of reaction from the top in Germany, which is a bit different from other places. So this book came out actually as an idea out of 2 non-related events around 2020. One was the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced a lot of academics, universities, students and faculty alike to replace the intimate physical spaces of learning in the classroom, in the university, with the internet. And on the one hand, this was very disappointing, because especially for first-year students and second-year students, they couldn't experience campus life and the more social and exciting side of being in a university. On the other hand, by being trained more and more how to use a virtual connection, you could reach people from far corners of the world, and you could actually create both classes, seminars, interviews with people in places where maybe it was not easy for you to get there or wasn't easy for them to come to you. So suddenly we felt there is a global conversation that the internet enabled us that usually was not possible if we limited our conversations to the spaces in which we lived and work. So that was one process that we felt we can really talk with a lot of people about Palestine and the place of Palestine in the world as we became more and more aware of the internet. The second process was a sense that while the Western academia in particular, and I think some section of the academia in the Global South, were moving ahead with what one can call the decolonization of knowledge. Namely, they were willing to re-evaluate the way we research, study the history of places that were colonized by the West, of communities that came to Europe and still feel that they are still colonized, kind of using the concept of colonialism not just as an historical period, not just referring to it as something that happened from one point in history to the other point of history, but rather a mindset that actually continues in many places, including inside Europe, even after the colonialists, the colonial empires themselves disintegrated and many people liberated themselves. That was in 2020, in 2021, quite a main theme in many universities in the West, including in Germany, by the way, where you had the emergence of centers for decolonial studies, courses on decoloniality, and so on. On the other hand, all these very blessed effort to rethink how we analyze history, how we analyze contemporary realities, this effort seemed to skip Palestine. It was clear that for many universities and many institutes, you cannot include the history of Israel and Palestine in the history of colonialism. You cannot include it in the history of anti-colonialism. You can do it as an activist, for sure, but you cannot integrate it into the official teaching and study. And that was quite a challenge. We thought, and I don't think we were the only ones, I'm not sure we were the first ones, it doesn't matter, but we thought we have to break this glass ceiling and include in the discussion in our courses, in our seminars, in our international conferences, the issue of Palestine and Israel within this discussion of how to decolonize knowledge. And use probably a language that the official media, the mainstream political system, and I would say the mainstream academia was not willing to use when talking about Israel and Palestine. Still today, I don't think there are many universities in the West, definitely there are not many universities in Germany, who would teach Zionism as colonialism, who would teach the Palestinian struggle as an anti-colonialist struggle, and would talk about the future as decolonization rather than as a search for a peaceful solution. All that was not alien to activists, but and probably quite a few academics were familiar with this dictionary, but it was not integrated into the official academic world. So we thought these two things kind of pushed us to try and find a way which would keep us safe vis-a-vis our management in the university, the authorities, we don't have to make such statements as you did here, but it was not far from it. I mean, it was not official statements, but we knew the dangers, if you want, or the challenges. So the idea was to discuss with known people who have a long history of activism, both on general issues, but we knew had a particular interest in Palestine, and to see how we can discuss with them all these challenges that 2020, 2021, of course we didn't know about 2023 yet when we started this project, but to discuss this, first of all, anormality, where you, in the academia, which is supposed to be the, you know, the shrine of freedom of expression, Palestine is a taboo for many of these institutions. So we wanted to ask them, because they were, first of all, they were very prominent in their own field, and they had less to worry about what would happen to them if they do. So we took a group of people that we know would be able to speak freely on this, but we also wanted to consult them how to deal with it. And we also wanted to help us solve a conundrum, to deal with a gap that I'm sure you're all familiar with. And the gap is absolutely clear today, but it was already visible in 2021. Civil societies around the world, including in the West, who understand quite well the situation in Israel and Palestine, feel strong solidarity with the Palestinians. Some are willing to be very active in the solidarity movement, on the one hand, and political elites that continue their policies towards Israel and Palestine as if there is no such pressure from below. The gap between official political positions on Israel and Palestine and the impulses and ideas and concept of the society as a whole is so huge that it deserved, in our mind, a conversation, not just to analyze why the gap exists, but maybe together find a way of narrowing the gap, making sure that those who have the power to change the reality in Israel and Palestine may at least partly implement some of the most basic demands that we have from them as electorate, as members of the civil society, as conscious members of humanity. So we started gathering names, and everyone was very happy to talk with us. And I would point out to three major themes that came out from the conversations we had with such a diverse and fascinating group of people. I should say these are not interviews. These are conversations between myself and whoever was the person I talked to. And I think three themes came out of this particular project. One, we found out that actually these intellectuals, thinkers, probably in Gramscian terms could be called organic intellectuals, had a lot of experience, and although they will probably not be the ones who would carry on the struggle for Palestine or the struggle for justice beyond Palestine, would be probably the mission of a much younger generation than most of those we talked to. Nonetheless, there's something to be learned from experience that spans sometimes 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And we don't always have a chance to direct these people to look back at their actions, look back at what they contributed, and see what they think they did that can still help us today and tomorrow. This is not to romanticize or idealize what they did in the past, but rather to build on what they did in the past, because we are facing huge challenges, not only in Germany, but also in many other parts when it comes to our solidarity with Palestine. And it was very clear, and that was the second, I think, themes that came out, because we asked them to share with us their life experience, actually. The second thing that came out was a very clear statement by them that however they tried and whatever they attempted, anything they articulated about Palestine, even if they were very famous academic professionals in their own field, was always defined as a political position, not a result of their professional research, which was very, very frustrating for them. They claimed that when they defined Zionism as settler colonialism, this was an academic position, not an opinionated position. When they defined the events in 1948 in Palestine as ethnic cleansing, that was after researching, finding out what is ethnic cleansing, whether it fits what the events of 1948, basing it on proper research of archives and documents. And yet, when they faced their own managements, their own political system, their own cultural system, they were said, okay, this is your opinion, this is your activist head talking, not your professional one, which they said never happened to them with any other issues over time. Yes, there was a time when you opposed American imperialism in Vietnam in a university, and people would say, oh, you are a leftist, and that's why you're saying it. But not in 2020. If you taught in an American university that the adventure of America in Vietnam was imperialist, that was welcomed by the university. You could even talk about apartheid in the southern parts of the United States. You could even talk about the genocide of the Native Americans in 2021 as part of the official curriculum. But you could not talk about ethnic cleansing in Palestine without saying, okay, you know, you're entitled to your political position, but that is not something that we should pass to the textbooks or to the schools, because this is just an opinion and not the result. And there was a second theme, and it was very interesting to talk how they dealt with it, how they challenged it. By the way, we learned from Yanis Varoufakis, for instance, and Angela Davis, that of course it was not only true about Palestine. There were still other issues that were still considered taboo as part of the official curriculum. So it was good to have a wider context. So, for example, Angela Davis brought to the fore the whole issue of the prison system in America and how it is used in an oppressive means against the African American community. This is still not totally natural for the American academia or even media to deal with. And Varoufakis did the same for certain economic policies and how we teach economics in universities and how we prepare the next generation of people who would probably populate the capitalist and financial systems of our life. But of course, we try to focus on Palestine in the book and brought them here. Thirdly, we had a very thorough and profound discussion with them about the role of the left in the struggle for Palestine. And we learned a lot of things, and of course this is an ongoing process of learning and unlearning. In the 1970s, as you know, probably know, the left was the main, in a very liberally defined way, what is the left, I won't go into it, but the left was carrying the burden, I would say, of the solidarity with the Palestinians in the world. In challenging the more social democratic left that was still in the 70s very supportive of Israel, like the Social Democratic Party in Germany, or the Labour Party in Britain, or the Democratic Party in the United States. So we're not talking about these established social democratic parties, but the left that is left of these political institutions in the 70s. But whether in the Arab world, or whether in the Muslim world, whether in the global South, and definitely in the global North, this movement did not achieve its main goal of creating an international solidarity movement that would go beyond supporting the Palestinian cause into the field of actively and effectively influencing the reality on the ground. Not one square inch of Palestine was liberated. Not one political elite in the West deviated from basically pro-Israeli and pro-Zionist policies. And that is something that had, after so many years, we could go back and analyze why it happened. And you will see that there is no consensus here. People have different views, which is fine, why it happened, but it's very important because I don't think we can give up on the left as a very important driver in the vehicle that would lead eventually to Palestine's liberation and freedom. But it is time to reassess, to reconsider a lot of the issues that came from people who came from Palestine itself or from the Arab world that we talked to. We're talking about the Eurocentric orientation of the communist parties, of the left in Europe even today, saying that this causes or raises questions of how do we relate to tradition, to religion, issues which are very important to the people themselves in the area, and sometimes there are some kind of clear agendas of the left that needs to be more pragmatic, more interactive, more dialectical with the with the values and aspiration of the people themselves. So you will find their critique on the Arab left, a critique on the European left, but it's a positive critique. It comes from a place where you want to make the left more effective in the struggle for Palestine. It's not in order to totally negate. It's very important, and this is, you feel when you will look at this that we're just beginning the conversation here. That it's not, we're not concluding it in the book. We're just opening it in that respect. So these are the three themes. There's some, now I would like to connect them, and still talking about the book, but try to connect it to what you are facing here. As far as I can understand, I'm not from here, but what I can see is happening in Germany, which I think is very important, and you will see how, I hope you will see that these conversations that we had there are also relevant for you, not just as a global movement of solidarity, but with the particular challenges that Germany faces. So one thing that I'm sure you are familiar, that German academics, German journalists, definitely German politicians are very careful of not doing since the 7th of October 2023 is to talk about the historical context. From the moment the United Nations General Secretary Guterres reacted to the Hamas attack on the 7th of October by saying, yes, I condemn it, but you have to understand it was not done in a vacuum. That's the words he used. I think what he meant that there was an historical context to it. Israel immediately reacted by defining him as an anti-Semitic person and demanded that he would be fired. And particularly German academic institutions and media institutions took this even more seriously, I think, than even Israel, in trying to create a regime of intimidation and terror against anyone who's using the word context or dare to teach the context. Definitely as an academic who would claim this is my expertise, that's why I'm telling you about the context. It has nothing to do with only my opinion. It's not only to do with my opinions, this is my job. But of course, this is something that can easily be done in academia. because academic courage is an oxymoron. Most academics are not very courageous people. It comes with the territory. It's the way the universities are built. They're built as nowadays as corporations, as businesses. You are very, your opinions are not very important. What is important that you fit into the institution, and you can easily lose your job if you don't fit. And academics know it, and they're very, very careful in not challenge and not irritating the management and the institution, which is a pity because after all, we expect them more than any section of society to be courageous and critical and so on. But this is something that was the mission statement of academia 100 years ago, but is totally abused today by most academic institutions. So we find in the conversation the context, and Germans, whether they are part of the solidarity movement, whether they are part of the attempt to silence the solidarity movement, need to go to the context. Now, of course, the only context which you are allowed to discuss in Germany is to say, remember what happened here between 1939 and 1945, and if you remember that, you know you have to be silent and not use any criticism against Israel. That's the only context you are allowed to use here. But of course, this is not the right context for examining the horrible violence that was on the 7th of October, and even more so the genocide of Gaza since the 7th of October. The context is going back not even to 1948, but we have to teach people and talk to people about the very essence of the Zionist project and Germany's role in this project long before the Holocaust. Long before the Holocaust. Germany was part of imperial Europe, of colonial Europe, that experienced a wave after wave of racism against Jews. And long before the Holocaust, which was the worst kind, of course, manifestation of this racism, an alliance, a very weird alliance of people, very prominent people in evangelical Christianity, very important capitalists, very important imperialists, and very distinguished Jewish thinkers and members of the Jewish elite in Western Europe, all of them together came to the conclusion, which is very bizarre, that there's no way of dealing with the European racism towards Jews. And therefore, the only way you can deal with it is by allowing and helping the Jews to build a European Jewish state outside of Europe. And to do it at the heart of the Arab world, and to do it at the expense of the indigenous people of Palestine. There were quite a lot of people who said it sounds immoral. Some people said it's impractical. How can you force the Arab world to solve a European problem of anti-Semitism? But this was the age of imperialism and colonialism, and you knew that what mattered is not the moral validity of a solution, but rather whether you have the power to implement it. And they had the power to implement it. And they implemented it, they sustained it, and Germany was part of that process. It was not the only member of that alliance that allowed it to happen. Probably Britain was far more important at that particular juncture than Germany, but don't underestimate the German part of creating a Jewish state at the heart of the Arab world at the expense of the indigenous people of Palestine. This is the source of the violence. This is the context. That's where it begins. This explains everything that happened since then. You don't start with the symptoms of the violence. What we saw on the 7th of October and what we saw after the 7th of October are the symptoms of the violence. They are not the reason for the violence and the bloodshed and the carnage. Then came another moment where Germany had to play a very important role, and this was after the Holocaust. Around 1945, between 1945 and 1948, Europe, without consulting most of the world that was still colonized, decided for all of us what are universal values, what is international law, what is international morality, had a very impressive Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and had three major problems to make it stick as a global statement for the world, as to make sure that there will be no Third World War and there will not be another genocide. The first challenge was that you still had apartheid in South Africa. This was brushed aside. The same year that you had the Human Rights Declaration, South Africa passed its apartheid law. European thinkers, philosophers, including in West Germany, did not think it was a problem to talk about human rights and civil rights and give total support for the apartheid regime in South Africa. There was one problem. The second problem was that there was, in the same year of the Declaration of Human Rights, Israel expelled half of Palestine's population, demolished half of the Palestinian villages, and most of the Palestinian towns. Again, Europe, Western Europe in particular, with the help of Western Germany, said, that's okay, that does not negate our values of international justice and human rights. And there was a third challenge at the time, and that was the French colonialism in Algeria. And again, somehow, you know, in a very elastic way, those who believed in human rights and international law said, this is fine, this is not something that should trouble us. We are the beacon, we are the lighthouse that will tell the world what are human rights, what are civil rights, what is international law. Some of it changed with the years. But what really mattered is the German part of it. Why don't you say the Western German part of it, because Eastern Germany was not playing was not part of the game at the time. It was only West Germany. And what was really important was to say, and that was a huge challenge, put aside South Africa, Algeria, the continued colonialism in other parts of the world when Europe claims to be the beacon of human rights. What about the racism against the Jews that produced the Holocaust? And in many ways was the main motive to try and find an international legal system that would prevent such racism either to continue or to produce the same kind of catastrophes it had already produced. That was the real challenge. Now, there were, and you always as an historian, you go to the alternative voices to make sure that people understand that there were alternatives. We always say to students, you cannot teach what happened if, what could have happened if in history, but you can teach what people suggested as an alternative because it makes you think. And people said, even in this country, the most reasonable thing to do after the genocide of the Jews in Europe is to plead with the Jews of Europe, stay in Europe. Build with us together a Europe that would be fighting racism, not just against Jews, against anyone. Let's build a Europe that would make sure that whatever happened before would never happen again. But we still had that alliance that was totally committed to the idea that the best solution for the Jews of Europe is a European Jewish state at the heart of the Arab world, at the expense of the Palestinians, and there needed to be a deal to make sure that this is going to work also after 1945. And the deal was very clear. How do you integrate Western Germany into the so-called civilized world when it is not yet denazified? How do you do this? You do two things. First of all, you accept the Zionist ideology, which is wrong, by the way, but the main claim of the Zionist ideology, that Israel is a Jewish state. It's not only a Jewish state, it represents all the Jews of the world, and in it, it represents all the Jewish victims of the Holocaust, both those who died in the Holocaust and those who survived the Holocaust. So this is the only address you have, if you want to discuss the connection between reintegrating Germany, that is Western Germany, into the community of civilized nations, and to overcome the legacy of the Holocaust. You need a legitimacy from someone for that. Now, in 1945 to 1948, and definitely until 1950, most of the Jews in the world did not live in Israel. And definitely most of the survivors of the Holocaust were not in Israel. But that didn't interest the political elite. The political elite said, there's only one address, the State of Israel. Now, if the State of Israel would legitimize Western Germany as the new Germany, then we can include it in the West, and we can strengthen the Western Bloc in the Cold War. Yeah, we said 40 minutes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you still have time.
Okay, this is very German. Yeah, good. Yeah. Okay, I have another 9 minutes, 20 seconds, and 0.52 milliseconds. Okay. Now, this absorption, if you want, for Western Germany in order to serve the purpose of the Cold War was very important and led to this almost absurd development where Israel was either the first or the second state in the world to recognize Germany as a new Germany. I always said, you know, given what happened, you could have been number 5 or number 6. There was no need to be at the head of the queue to recognize a new Germany before this country was denazified. But, you know, politics have their own cynical side to it. Now, this is a very important context, and of course what happens afterwards is that Germany, especially after unification, becomes such an important part of the EU that we sometimes don't distinguish between its policies as a response to the legacy of what happened in the Second World War, but from its legacy as the prominent member of the EU. And I think as the time goes by, what really drives Germany is its prominent position in the EU. But the pretext to silence us, to censor you, is to remind you all the time of the legacy of the Second World War. But it's not the motive anymore. The motive is the same motive of the alliance that I call Global Israel, the alliance of politicians, military industry, security industry, capitalists, to say we need to support Israel because it serves our interests. And that alliance sometimes includes members who have contradictory purposes, but they have something in common. Defending unconditionally the State of Israel serves their purpose. Some of it is theological, some of it is strategic, some of it is financial. And there's, of course, a very important role, I won't go into it, to the pro-Israeli lobby in making sure that that alliance sticks together. But here we come to our time, and with this I will finish. The more Israel, as the years pass by, and especially in this century, and especially after Israel elected an extreme right government in November 2022, not to mention after the beginning of the genocide in Gaza, there is a certain challenge here which is not easy to reconcile with that historical unconditional support for the Jewish state. And there is, I think, a recognition that is not translated into policy, but I'm optimistic. I think it will eventually translate into policy. There's a recognition that we are also discussing with people in the book. One recognition is very important. There's no chance for a change within Israel itself. No chance. Whatever you see now in terms of the attitudes toward the Palestinians in Palestine, there are huge internal debates in Israel on other issues, definitely. Almost a civil war, I would say. But the civil war in Israel is not about how to treat the Palestinians. It's about other issues. And you recognize that actually if you say as a German government, oh, the problem is the Netanyahu government, so if there will be elections, we will have an easier way of reconciling our unconditional support for a state that practices apartheid and genocide and ethnic cleansing. No, it's very clear that this is not going to stop just because of political transformation inside Israel. So what do you do as German politicians, as an EU politician? Again, not as German because of the legacy of the Second World War, but rather as a leading country in the West, which is, to my mind, is far more important now than the legacy of the Second World War, especially for a younger generation of German politicians and journalists and academics. The second challenge and recognition is that this idea that Israel is a Jewish state is now totally challenged by Jews themselves, by a younger generation of Jews, and in all places in the United States. And part of the challenge is translated to being active in the solidarity movement with the Palestinians. This global alliance of Israel begins to shrink and include Christian Zionists much more than Jews in America. Populist right-wing governments, fascist movements, indecent, I would call it, rulers in the global south and Germany. And yet, this is not the same powerful alliance that was able to impose a European Jewish state at the heart of the Arab world or at the expense of the Palestinians. This is becoming more and more risky, as even from a cynical perspective of some of these members of the alliance. I'll give you one example. You get much more money from selling arms to Saudi Arabia than you get from Israel, and the Saudis will not mention the Holocaust to get a reduction in the price. So this is something that the military industry understands in the world, the security industry understands. Israel used to export a lot of high-tech technologies. Well, many of those who produce those high-tech technologies have already left Israel and are operating outside of Israel. So all these, even cynical interests, are at risk of being absent from this alliance in the future. So to sum up, and with this I finish, it is a world on fire, or Palestine is in a world of fire in two meanings of the word fire. And with this we can open the discussion. On one hand, there are fires, real fires, as we know, because of ecological injustice, stupid ecological policies. And there are fires created not out of natural disaster, but by humans. Just have few minutes, and I'm sure you have seen the scenes coming from Gaza, even from yesterday or the day before yesterday, and you feel that in Palestine, in Gaza in particular, the fire is a real destructive force, not a metaphoric one. The fire is burning babies, is burning children in Gaza, the fire of the bombs that are being dropped by F-16 and F-35 of the Israeli Air Force. So there is a world in fire, but there's another fire, and that's the fire of activism, of justice, that I think many of us have it in our, this is the small fire we have inside us. And that fire, because I'm finishing here a lecture tour in Germany. I'm actually on the way to the airport, but I decided to visit you. I finished really, I don't remember, 8, 9 meetings in Germany in 1 week. And I can understand the lot of despair I hear, especially from young activists, saying, you know, we are facing this formidable, impossible regime that will not allow us to demonstrate, will not allow us to show solidarity. We don't see how we can change the reality on the ground. It's very depressing, it's very despairing. That is true. But two things this fire inside us should do. One is to realize that the Palestinians in Gaza and the Palestinians in Palestine in general don't have the luxury of our despair. They cannot afford our despair. They need our belief that we have the power to change We should be realistic. We can't promise something we cannot deliver, that we will stop the genocide tomorrow. Unfortunately, we don't have the power to do that. But we can do whatever we can for the day after tomorrow, or the day after it. And in the long term, that doesn't mean that we're not doing that. So that's one thing that I think this inner fire should do. But no less important, of course, is the structure, is the organization, is the global networking. If you are stuck in Germany in probably more fierce methods of silencing you, it's a different picture when it comes into a global context. Let us shame German universities that don't allow you to have courses on Palestine. Let us shame professors in Germany who usually are very articulate and educated and very moral when they talk about colonialism and decolonization or about the Ukraine, and talk about their moral cowardness when they don't talk about Palestine. Let us, we can internationalize this kind of struggle because in some places it's easier than other places to do it. But I think we need this power, not because there is no hope in the distant future. There is. This world on fire would be replaced, I believe, in a world that is not on fire. But we are worried about the time that would pass from now until that more positive moment, and we will have to find a way of narrowing this gap between what many of us feel is the historical development in the right direction and the near future and the destructive reality on the ground that every day brings with it new evidence that we are far from saying that the genocide is over, or we are far from saying that Israel has no other plans for the West Bank, the Palestinians inside Israel, and God knows what kind of aggression they are planning towards Syria, Lebanon, and beyond it. So all of this is true. But I think our ability to believe and imagine the long term should help us to look together for even more effective ways of forcing those with power here in the EU, in the world, including in the global south. There are some countries that can do much more than they do in order to make sure that the next steps are not going to take place. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your input. And well, this sounds weird.
Yeah, no, I close my mic. So that
now it's better? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. So now we will have the Murmelrunde. It means you have 3 minutes time to talk with your neighbor about what you just heard, maybe also about what you want to ask, and then afterwards we will start the discussion. Thank you. Now I think like 5 to 10 minutes to answer.
Yeah.
And then you can already raise your hands if you want to say something, if you have another comment, and I'll note that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try and cover as much as I can. The first question was about the very recent change in Germany. The new, as you rightly said, it's a verbal change, but a blessed one, no doubt. We're welcoming it. Still to be seen whether it is translated to actions. I'm not so sure. It's easy to talk. It's much more difficult to translate it to proper action. But I'm not underestimating its importance. And I think this should give us some satisfaction, because I think you have to close yours. Yeah. Oh, no.
That's even
okay.
worse.
That's even worse. Okay, I'll try and speak from here. And that I think what is giving us some hope for this is that definitely this is the accumulative effect of the solidarity movement from below. We're talking here about politicians, not particularly impressive politicians, to say the least. And they are not responding morally to the situation in Gaza. They respond from an electoral point of view, from a cynical, practical point of view. Now, if they think from a practical, electoral, political point of view, it is time to change the conversation about Israel, it is because they believe that, contrary to what they probably say to others, the movement in Germany or the emotions of many people in Germany are such that they would have to react in a more assertive way towards Israel. That's the only reason they are doing it. It's not that something happened in the last week that didn't happen in the last 19 months. It's just, and that, it's not enough. We all understand it's not enough, but it should give us courage to continue, because this, they hear us even if they arrest us. And they hear us even if they don't allow us certain slogans, but they do hear us, and which is very important. But let's wait and see. As you said yourself, talking comes easy. Really challenging Israel through proper sanctions, that would be a moment to cherish, and to think that maybe we are beginning to see a new chapter, but let's wait patiently for that, because it hasn't happened yet. The question of the Israeli working class in forming an alliance, a very important question. And most of the working class in Israel, not most of it, but some large chunks of it are people who are second or third generation of people who came from the Arab world or the Muslim world. Unfortunately, this community in many parts is now also manipulated and regulated by religious hierarchies, ideologies, political parties that abuse actually the traditional Arab Jewish tolerance and understanding of the situation. So I can't see them becoming a force for change from within. I can see them playing a huge and positive role in the post-Israel Palestine. Because European Jews or descendants of European Jews have dual nationality, they have jobs they can reignite elsewhere, so maybe like some whites in South Africa, they would feel they don't want to be in a place which is democratic and not Jewish. But I think that people who originally come from the Arab world and can play a very important role in reintegrating, because you have to remember, despite all the project of Zionism, Palestine is still part of the Arab world. You can be in Eurovision, but you're still in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the only future for Palestine is to organically reconnect it to Syria, to Jordan, to Lebanon and Egypt. Otherwise, there's no hope for any reconciliation and progress. You need to stop this alienation of Palestine that Zionism created, and whoever would among the Jews will be part of it will have to get used to it. Whether they like it or not is not a good enough reason not to aspire for it. The lobby in Germany, I think you're absolutely right, but I think you have to understand how lobby works. Lobby needs a fertile ground. Lobby cannot invent something. The lobby can manipulate a certain guild complex, a certain economic interest, a certain strategic interest, and definitely it's important to understand that this lobby is doing it quite effectively in Germany, but it's doing it quite effectively elsewhere in Britain and the United States. And we're facing here a lobby that, the lobby in Germany in many ways is a branch of the older lobby that operated for the last 100 years in Britain and the United States, which is a combination of Christian Zionists, capitalism, imperialism, and a lot of racism and Islamophobia. That is something that can be unpacked by something that I will come back to it in a moment towards the end, which I think our struggle against the lobby should not be isolated for our struggle against the way politics is being done in our time. And we need to revolutionize what politics means, how it is done, and so on. But I'll come back in a moment to this. Anti-Zionist Israelis' role, I think it's a good question. I can talk from my own perspective, but I think what happened to many of us is a realization that maybe some of us had many years ago. I'm talking about the contemporary anti-Zionist activism in Israel. You put aside, or you forget about all this conversation that you are part of a peace camp and there's another peace camp on the other side, and therefore you are contributing to a better future. No, you are not that different from anyone who is in the solidarity movement in Germany. You are someone who lives in historical Palestine who is in solidarity with the Palestinians. But because of where you are, let's say if you are an Israeli citizen or whether you're an ex-Israeli, you have a special role to play in it. But you are now part of a solidarity movement, and we have a great conversation here with Judith Butler on solidarity. What is the meaning of solidarity? And that is sometimes not easy for Israeli anti-Zionists, I'm generalizing here, of course it's not everyone, to understand that what happens when you are in a position of solidarity. You're not the driver. You are not deciding what is the future of Palestine. You are listening to the Palestinians or what they offer. You ask them to tell you how they imagine Jewish life in a decolonized Palestine, and you can react, of course. You can criticize, you can say it's effective, it's not effective, but you first have to get out of that, not yourself, but from what the world is doing. The world was always saying what is peace, what Israel and America wants, and the Palestinians should react. We need this new period where the Palestinians tell us what they want, what they visualize, what they imagine. They still have a lot of work to do in that respect, and then we can react. And I think that puts a very clear definition for me, for an anti-Israeli Zionist Jew, whether they are in Germany or in Israel itself. About the Israeli, the relationship between relationship with Israel in Germany through the EU context, if I understood it correctly, and I will connect it to the question of German silence and moral values, your questions, I will do them in one go together in one sentence. And so I'm sorry if I'm not relating to everything that was said. It's very clear to me that there are two processes in history that we are witnessing here. One is a process we have little to do with in terms of individuals, which is happening anyway. I think Israel disintegrates from within, not because we have a good meeting here in Germany, because there are internal processes that break down this society. It's not even the result of the Palestinian resistance. It's I don't have time to go into it, but the organic inherent problems of this whole project of turning a religion into nationalism. It's not working. And that is something that should be understood. The other process is, how do we contribute to what would come after the disintegration? How do we contribute for the disintegration not become genocide, not to become chaotic? People asked about Syria and Lebanon. This particular political elite believes it has the power to expand Israel into South Lebanon and South Syria. How do we react to this messianic particular political elite in Israel that really believes that this is an historical moment where they can recreate the biblical land of Israel they have read about in the Old Testament? All this is very important, but I think that we should understand that sometimes you have processes you have no control over, but if you are alert, you know how to deal with them. And a very good historical example is the fall of the Berlin Wall and the connection to to the success of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. You needed the end of the Cold War, which the ANC had nothing to do with, and creating a proper sanction regime that brought down the apartheid regime in South Africa, for instance. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I'll start with East Germany, and then I'll conclude with the questions were important about intersectionality, global solidarity, connection to places such as the genocide of the Tamil, connected to Kashmir as well, and so on. We'll come back to this in a second. You have to remember that East Germany was taken out from the consultation about, like the rest of the Soviet bloc. They were not asked by the West to participate in the conversation of how to build a better world. They were seen as the enemy of the better world. And therefore East Germany was not invited even to be part of it. And secondly, the Eastern Bloc, as we know, and that includes East Germany, its perception of the situation of Palestine was very different from West Germany. We can criticize it, and we can have a whole afternoon about it, but basically, unlike West Germany, people in East Germany saw the Palestinian national movement as a liberation movement, not different from other liberation movements in the Third World. The Soviet bloc had a very complicated and not always satisfactory relationship with liberation movements in the global South, but at least to their credit, one should say, the Palestine liberation movement was seen as a liberation movement and not as a terrorist organization. But again, this is a very unsatisfactory answer that requires probably even more in-depth analysis. Now, the more important thing for me is really to talk about this idea of international alliance and so on, and how it's connected to injustices elsewhere in the world. And I said it before, but maybe I didn't articulate it clearly enough. I really think that we are facing here two global alliances. One is global Israel and one is global Palestine. Global Israel is all these powerful, usually top-down political, economic, and financial institutions that, for whatever reason, see the support for Israel, the immunity for Israel, the invisibility of the Palestinians, the denial of the Palestinians, as serving their own purposes. I'm not talking now about how they explain it to themselves. That's less important. What is important, what they do in practice. In practice, they immunize Israel and allowed and provided the shield of immunity. That I think we were all surprised that the shield of immunity continued also during the genocide. We expected some problems in the shield. And maybe, as we said, maybe we are beginning to see, but we have to say, to wait and see. But that global Israel is shrinking. It's connected to the rise of populism, the re-emergence of populism and fascism in this country, in many other countries, and definitely this is clear that the more populist and fascist and less just socially, economically, and politically world politics and local politics will be, the more difficult it will be to create the other alliance, the global Palestine alliance, the global immunity that would, first of all, and more importantly than anything else, defend the Palestinian from further destruction. One thing is, it begins with initiatives by saying to European diplomats, your role is not to bring Jews and Arabs together. They don't need Berlin to meet. Your role is now to defend the Palestinians. That's the only role you have as Europeans now, is to defend the Palestinians from further destruction. Forget about your self-image as being the peacemakers, the mediators, and so on. I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about how it's viewed from above. And unfortunately, this kind of peace business was also part of the global Israel. It provided immunity because people said, what do you want from us? We are for a two-state solution. We are supporting peace. but actually what they did, they immunized the colonization, the ethnic cleansing, and now the genocide. Global Palestine is made out of a coalition that includes many people who are fighting against their own injustice, whether it's a national injustice, a religious injustice, economic injustice. Many indigenous people are fighting. What is really remarkable, and you could see it in the conversation we had in the book, is that never before had so many, not only individuals, but groups, minorities, and so on, felt that their struggle is also the struggle for Palestine. The turning Palestine into the symbol of struggle against injustice in your own place is relatively a new thing. And this is now a very powerful symbolic act that has to be translated into a more effective power globally and locally. And for that you need organization, you need structure. In fact, that's where the left has its most important contribution, to my mind, is to help structure it and organize it. I must tell you, and with this I would end, when you participate in a demonstration in London with 1 million people, 1 million people who demonstrate for Palestine, you understand few things. One is that the first time ever that so many millions of people in the world identify with Palestine. We never had it before. This is as bad as the moment. It's the worst moment on the one hand for the Palestinians on the ground, but unfortunately it's also the best moment for the Palestinian solidarity movement in terms of its size, instead of its expansion, its presence. Its presence. Why doesn't the present bring about the change in the worst moment is, of course, something we all have to work it. But the second thing you understand when you are with 1 million people in a demonstration is that people come from different perspectives. There are many things they don't agree upon. This is not people who come from the same ideological school. They have even debates about moral issues, about economic issues, but they decided to unify to save the Palestinians. We need to find a way to be less purist, more pragmatic, because especially for the urgent issues. For the long terms, we might have a more severe discussion between ideas, the secular state, democratic state, and so on. But for the sake of saving the Palestinians or helping them to continue their resistance and resilience, we need to be less purist. We need this wide pragmatic. With some people who probably are not, as I say in English, our cup of tea always, but we need them. We need them. And we have to have, and believe me, I know you all know, it's not the most pleasant experience. We need to talk to the people in government, in the mainstream media and mainstream academia. We always say in the solidarity movement, this is one of the most difficult things to do, is to talk to self-centered, very assertive and arrogant politicians in the German parliament. It's something I can do for 10 minutes, but not more, before I have to go to the toilet and do something. But we need to continue this. We need to continue this, so maybe we have to alternate so that people don't suffer for too long. Unfortunately, all these methods are important because of the urgency. I'm not talking about how to build a long-term movement and so on, but we all understand that the moment is now. It was actually yesterday and the day before yesterday, because Israel continues every day with a new day of genocide on the ground. This is not over. This is not over yet, and we have to do all we can to stop it. Thank you.